There's a strange irony in saying this now, but one of the thinkers who pushed me towards socialism was an extreme individualist. Before I was reading Marx, before I was thinking seriously about class or collective ownership, I encountered Max Stirner, and his book The Ego and Its Own felt like intellectual dynamite. Stirner doesn't ask how society should be structured, he asked something more unsettling. Why should you obey anything at all? Not God, not the state, not morality, not humanity, not even justice. Stirner strips everything down to one thing, the individual, and strangely, following that line of thought is what led me to socialism. Published in 1844, The Ego and Its Own was a bomb thrown into the already radical atmosphere of the 19th century Germany. Stirner was associated with the young Hegelians, a circle that included thinkers like Karl Marx and Bruno Bauer. They were all reacting to Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, trying to radicalize his philosophy. But Stirner went further than anyone else. He argued that abstract ideals, God, nation, morality, humanity, are spooks, phantoms, concepts we treat as sacred that end up ruling over us. For Stirner, once you treat an idea as sacred, you subordinate yourself to it. And that is a form of self-enslavement. Stirner's central claim is brutally simple. Nothing is above the individual, not even man as a universal category. He mocks humanism for replacing God with humanity. Instead of serving God, we now serve society. Instead of divine commandments, we obey moral duty. But the structure of submission remains. For Stirner, the truly free person recognizes that values are not sacred, they are tools. He calls this egoism, not selfishness in the shallow sense, but ownership of oneself. You act because you choose to, not because you kneel before abstractions. And here's where it gets interesting. At first glance, Stirner seems like a patron saint of extreme individualism, and some libertarians have embraced him that way. But reading Stirner carefully reveals something else. If nothing is sacred, then property rights aren't sacred either. The state isn't sacred, capital isn't sacred, markets aren't sacred. They are arrangements of power. Stirner writes about the union of egoists, voluntary associations formed not out of moral duty, but mutual interest. And this is where something shifted for me. If workers are coerced by economic necessity, if survival requires submission to wage labor, if capital structures choices in ways that dominate individuals, then capitalism isn't an expression of egoism. It is a system of constraint. Stirner's ruthless critique of authority doesn't stop at religion or the state. It can extend to economic domination. And that realization became my road towards socialism. Marx was deeply influenced and deeply irritated by Stirner. In the German ideology, Marx devotes hundreds of pages to attacking him. Why? Because Stirner reduced everything to individual consciousness, while Marx insisted material conditions shape individuals. For Marx, freedom isn't just a psychological independence. It requires transforming economic structures, and that's where Stirner's thought opened a door for me. If you truly reject domination, if you refuse to worship abstractions, then you must also examine who controls material life, who owns housing, food systems, production, healthcare. If those are controlled by a small class, then most individuals are not truly self-owning. Stirner radicalized the question, Marx answered it structurally. Here's the paradox. Stirner's extreme individualism can lead not to isolation, but to solidarity. Not because solidarity is morally commanded, but because cooperation can enhance individual power. If collective ownership expands real autonomy, if democracy in the workplace increases self-determination, and if social safety nets free individuals from desperation, then socialism becomes not a moral sacrifice, but an egoistic alignment of interests. Not serve humanity, but build conditions where individuals flourish. Stirner strips away moralism. What remains is power, and once you see how power operates economically, socialism becomes a serious response. Stirner is dangerous. He dissolves foundations. He refuses ultimate justifications. He leaves you without sacred ground. But that intellectual demolition has value. It forces you to ask, why do I believe this? Who benefits from this system? Is this principle genuinely mine or inherited? For me, Stirner didn't provide a political blueprint. He provided a solvent. He dissolved illusions. And in the space left behind, questions about economic power became unavoidable. Stirner begins with the individual. Marx begins with class. I began with Stirner and ended up thinking about structures, because once you reject false idols, you start looking at real constraints, and you realize that individual freedom without material security is fragile. Egoism without power is empty. Stirner taught me to distrust abstractions, and that skepticism, when turned toward capitalism, was my road toward socialism. Not because socialism is sacred, but because it better served the living, breathing individuals who actually exist.